Good morning, afternoon, and evening. I'm Callista Kirk, and welcome to the Carrying the Banner podcast, where we discuss the variety of ways that musicals can be used to educate and raise awareness throughout the community. Let's jump right in. Today we are going to be talking about the LGBTQ+ community being celebrated in theater and how their struggles and triumphs are portrayed on stage. This time, instead of the usual 3, I've chosen to explore 4 musicals: Rent by Jonathan Larson, Falsettos by William Finn, Everybody's Talking About Jamie by Tom McRae, and Fun Home by Lisa Cron. As always, a playlist of the music discussed will be linked to this episode for your listening pleasure. Let's start off with Rent. Rent is loosely based on a 19th century French opera, but the musical we're talking about wasn't written until the 20th. This musical debuted on Broadway in 1996 and was nominated for 10 Tonys, 10 Drama Desk Awards, and a Pulitzer Prize for Drama. There have been countless productions of the musical since its initial success, including multiple national and international tours, and most recently a television performance called Rent Live that aired on Fox January of 2019. As a warning, this musical does talk about various facets of the so-called bohemian life in detail, both the good and the bad. Drug use, sex, AIDS, and HIV are some of those included. As a precaution, if you are sensitive to any of these topics, I would steer clear of this musical. Rent centers around a group of friends, the majority of which are struggling artists in New York City. There is a filmmaker, performer, musician, exotic dancer, and drag queen, among others. They are forced to cope with their own morality as AIDS and HIV spreads viciously, and the rapid gentrification of their community that attempts to modernize and mechanize both the area that they live in and their future as artists and New Yorkers. Rent showcases the diversity of the LGBTQ+ community by firstly having a spectrum of genders and sexualities appear on stage. In a small sample, there are bisexual, lesbian, gay, genderqueer, and gender-fluid characters portrayed with depth and passion in this story. Secondly, it shines a light on their struggles, especially with the AIDS and HIV epidemic. It not only shows how it damages the LGBTQ+ community, causing character deaths and illnesses, but how it also brings people together and uniting with that common trait. This is seen in the intimate and infamous support group scenes. Thirdly, the musical celebrates the triumphs of the LGBTQ+ community on several occasions, as their art, identity, and success are depicted in a way to resist the pressures of gentrification in New York City. This celebration is best represented in the finale of Act 1, a song called La Vie Bohème. This song puts on a pretend funeral for the death of their quote-unquote bohemia to be replaced by quote-unquote cybermania. In the final eulogy, the ensemble sings praise to the parts of Bohemia that made it so beautiful. They dedicate themselves to bisexuals, trisexuals, homo sapiens, carcinogens, hallucinogens, men, Pee Wee Herman. I don't know if you can call that singing, but we're just going to move on. It is this proclamation of their diversity and variety that makes the LGBTQ+ community praised beautifully on stage by a cast that represents them accurately. This musical is made especially for anyone in the LGBTQ+ community that is ashamed of their place within the community. It is almost impossible after seeing Rent to think your gender or sexuality should not be praised and inhabited with pride. It creates a group of characters that are found all across the spectrum and lets unsure people know that it is both okay to be unsure and not identify as something specifically, and that you can claim a label if you want and you will be celebrated regardless. As of February of 2019, a production of Rent is currently traveling the United States for a 20th anniversary tour, so if it stops in your city anytime soon, I would encourage you to look into tickets. The 2005 film adaptation and Rent Live television performance are also currently accessible with a Hulu subscription, and the latter is currently available on the official Fox website. The original Broadway cast recording can also be found on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Music for your listening pleasure. Rent is a super fun musical to view or listen to, so I would recommend it to anyone and everyone that wants to try it out. And that's it for Rent. Moving on to Falsettos. Falsettos first debuted on Broadway in 1992 and was nominated for 7 Tony Awards, 2 Drama Desk Awards, and a Theatre World Award. While the original Broadway production was a huge success, the revival in 2016 was perhaps even more so. With its cast jam-packed with theater legends, the production was nominated for 13 awards spanning the Tonys, Drama Desk, Drama League, and more. Out of these 13 nominations, they won, now listen carefully, none. In my opinion, they were snubbed at the 2017 Tonys, but that's a story for another time. Regardless of the number of awards that were stolen from this musical, it was still a massive success in both the theater community and society as a whole. A professional recording of this musical aired in a one-night-only special on PBS in September of 2017, and theater fans and average Americans tuned in nationwide. Though the show closed in January of 2017, the musical was revived once again for a national tour that is currently, as of February of 2019, touring the US. As a warning, this musical does have some sexual undertones and addresses mental health, STDs, and STIs. If any of these topics are sensitive, I would advise against this musical. Falsettos is the story of what they call a tight-knit family in the late 70s and early 80s. They're struggling to stay unified and keep mentally stable despite all of the troubles that life seems to throw at them. The tight-knit family consists of Marvin and Trina with their son Jason, who is soon to turn 13 and have his bat mitzvah. Marvin discovers that he is actually gay and divorces Trina to be with his love, Whizzer. Despite the split, Marvin insists that he still loves Trina and Jason and wants the four of them, including Whizzer, to be a family. Trina eventually falls in love with Mendel, a psychiatrist they used to treat Marvin, and in the second act we are introduced to the lesbians from next door, as they call them in the show. This couple, Charlotte and Cordelia, a doctor and a caterer, find themselves weaved into this tight-knit family through Jason's bat mitzvah. Now that doesn't seem too complicated, does it? Yeah, it does sound complicated, and it is pretty complicated, but that's part of what makes it so beautiful. I'm also trying really hard not to spoil anything, so bear with me. This musical also shows how LGBTQ+ couples can fit into any family and, despite many homophobic assumptions, build loving and beautiful relationships with one another. It also raises awareness to the AIDS and HIV outbreak and how it damages families, as well as those diagnosed. The LGBTQ+ community is celebrated with two couples that undergo the turmoils of average relationships and are portrayed in whole, as to fully represent the entirety of their identity, rather than a punchline or to increase viewing numbers like many forms of media often do. In the song Unlikely Lovers, the lesbians from next door and Marvin and Whizzer unite for a moment of togetherness as their world seems to be crumbling around them. They sing together the lyrics, "There's nothing to fear." It's sung not only to their partners but to the group as a whole, unifying their place in the LGBTQ community and this complicated society. This musical is perfect for people in the LGBTQ+ community who would benefit from seeing their identities portrayed on stage in fullness, which I think is a large majority of the community. The production could also be informative and influential to people who are getting used to an LGBTQ+ family member. They will see the characters benefiting greatly from the love and acceptance that is promoted. In seeing this crazy weird family filled with different genders, sexualities, ages, and ethnic backgrounds, audience members will see that it is not blood that makes a family, it is unconditional and non-discriminatory love. The original Broadway cast recording exists in 2 different albums for the 2 different acts on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. The first album is titled March of the Falsettos and the second Falsetto Line. For somewhat easier listening, the original revival cast recording can be found on its entirety on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. If you really go looking, there are some backstreet ways to rewatch the original Broadway revival live performance recording that aired on PBS, but I don't think I can legally share you any of those links. As far as seeing the production live, the US tour has just begun as of February of 2019, so I highly recommend you see it if it comes to your city. Falsettos is one of my favorite musicals of all time, so I really encourage you to see it, listen to it, whatever you can. And that's it for Falsettos. Moving on to Everybody is Talking About Jamie. This musical first premiered in early 2017 in Sheffield and was transferred to the Apollo Theatre in the West End in November of the same year. It was nominated for a number of UK honours, so they might not sound super familiar, including 6 What's on Stage and 5 Laurence Olivier Awards. This musical does include some explicit language, but not an excessive amount. I believe the content of the show and the story are meaningful enough to see beyond the mildly sensitive language, but it is up to the viewers and listeners to decide for themselves. This musical centers around Jamie New, a sophomore student who, when asked in a career counseling class what he wants to be when he grows up, reveals to his fellow students and teachers that he wants to be a drag queen, or performer as he puts it. The career counselor tells him that it will never happen, which further motivates him and the rest of the story. The musical follows Jamie through the struggles of his journey to being a drag queen, being bullied by kids at school for coming out as gay, not being allowed entry into prom because he wants to wear drag, his father calling him disgusting, and Jamie considering himself ugly without his drag persona. All of these factors point out the homophobia, both from outside forces and internalized, that exists in today's society. But with the representation of his struggles and the struggles of the LGBTQ+ community, there are also his triumphs and successes that are displayed passionately. From getting his first pair of heels, to applying makeup for the first time, to his first drag show, and going to prom in full drag with a chorus of student allies not allowing him to be refused entry. This allows his identity to be celebrated with pride, despite all of the people and forces that are attempting to push him away from his joy. Along with discussing the LGBTQ+ experience, Everybody is Talking About Jamie also discusses important topics such as careers within the performance industry, the definition of family, mental health, and Islamophobia. The song Work of Art features the scene where Jamie's best friend applies makeup to him for the first time in the school bathroom. When a teacher finds them, she remarks that Jamie is a sight to behold, a work of art. She makes sure that he knows that he is beautiful, worthy of being in a museum, but the school bully tries to tear down all the positivity that she is feeding him. As the two characters with differing ideologies in the same scene perform lyrics that echo one another but contrast boldly, it gives a perfect representation of the bigotry that still lurks no matter how celebrated an LGBTQ person is or should be. This musical attempts to squash that bigotry. The song ends with Jamie turning away from the criticism and embracing his new identity fully, telling everyone about his big drag show coming up. It is the perfect exhibition of how LGBTQ youth should be celebrated for being themselves, not bullied by their peers. This musical represents both the LGBTQ+ struggles and successes, and is therefore made for anyone that could benefit from seeing it performed on stage. For queer people, especially the youth, it is a big deal to see someone from the community living their truth boldly and passionately on stage, despite the homophobia and bigotry that tries to take them down. It is valuable for them to see an experience possibly similar to their own being portrayed in such form. For people who are related to members of the community, both familially and socially, it represents how to be a good ally to your LGBTQ friends and family members. By seeing the detrimental effects of bullying and harassment and the benefits of positivity, kindness, and a celebration of their identities, audience members are given examples of how to better their relationships with LGBTQ+ people. This musical is currently still residing in the Apollo Theatre in London, so if you find yourself near the West End, I would recommend stopping by. But if you, like me, do not live in England, the original West End cast recording is available on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube for your listening pleasure. Everybody is Talking About Jamie is a super catchy and super energetic musical, and it's really fun to listen to, and it has a great message. Now we're going to go from a mostly lighthearted musical to a mostly not so lighthearted musical. Fun Home first debuted on Broadway in 2015, and after numerous awards and nominations, went on to tour the U.S. and open off West End in 2016 and 2018. Some of those nominations for the Broadway production include 10 Tony Awards, including a win for Best Musical, 2 Theatre World Awards, and a Grammy. As a precaution, this musical does have some mild explicit language and sexual undertones. This is used to enhance the story of a woman in her various stages of life figuring out and exploring her sexuality, which calls for these factors. It also involves mentions of suicide and low mental health. Fun Home examines the life of Alison Bechdel through 3 stages of her life: 10 years old, or small Alison, her first year of college, medium Alison, or middle-aged Alison, who frames the story for the audience as a cartoonist drawing and captioning various scenes throughout her process of coming to terms with being a lesbian and coming out to her family. Small Alison's main conflict is the family dynamic that she is sensing fall apart. She imagines scenarios where she can be her true self and see a loving relationship between her father and mother to support her choices. Medium Alison's dilemma is being comfortable in her own skin and embracing her lesbian identity. While in her underclassmen years of college, she dates her first girlfriend, tries to volunteer in the school's gay union, and attempts to come out to her family in a letter back home. Alison, the initial storyteller, is attempting to document these stages in her life through her job as a successful cartoonist. She captions and paints scenes with words and frames the story through the development of these comic strips. This musical is tragic and emotional and compelling and gives insight into the struggle to establish an identity in the LGBTQ+ community when there are so many outside forces trying to change your mind and waver the confidence you have in yourself. One example of this and the 3 stages of Alison's life overlapping is in the song Party Dress. In this song, Alison is battling with her father over whether or not she will wear a dress to a party that the family is attending. She explains to him that dresses make her feel like a clown and she would much rather stick with her t-shirt and jeans. This overlaps with the narration of medium Alison as she is struggling to write home that she likes girls. Both of the characters are reaching landmarks in the building of her identity, and the contrast between the 2 scenes give a direct look into the LGBTQ+ experience, specifically the L, and the juxtaposition between feeling like your family dislikes who you are, and that they deserve to know that despite it, you are still happy with yourself. This musical is beneficial for the LGBTQ+ community, especially lesbians or those who are questioning their identity. This demographic would see their experiences that they overcame or are currently overcoming and would hopefully feel seen by witnessing the familial strains, uncertainty, and fear being portrayed with accuracy and passion. Fun Home could also be helpful for family members and friends that are insensitive to the intensity of this complicated experience that is happening in their friend or family member's life. It can help them learn and become more aware of what is happening. This musical does not currently have any productions on Broadway and the West End or on tour, so there's not any official way to watch a performance of this musical. However, there is an opportunity to listen to the 2015 original Broadway cast recording on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Music. Fun Home is an extremely emotional musical. It's super sad. I cry every single time I listen to the last 4 songs. But despite all the pain, it's realistic and heartbreaking, and I encourage you to let this story take over your heart, at least for some time. It's totally worth it. Now with Fun Home done, that is the end of episode 3 of the Carrying the Banner podcast. Once again, I'm Callista Kirk. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in episode 4, where we will be discussing 2 musicals, only 2, that attempt to tackle the big topic of mental health. This episode was written and recorded by me, Callista Kirk, and produced by Steve Baldwin and myself. It is part of the Figure 8 podcast network. That's Figure with an 8, so you can find us there. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @PodcastCTB, on Instagram @CarryingTheBannerPod, or on Facebook by searching Carrying the Banner Podcast. We are happy to hear your feedback, and that is also where the episode playlist will be linked for you with a highlight reel from each musical mentioned in the episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.